Hello, educators. Today I want to share with you some ideas about how to do story workshop in your classroom. I will include ideas that you could use anywhere from kindergarten to grade 7 or perhaps even high school. Why do story workshop? It brings out the creativity and imagination in children. It is easier for them to edit their story ideas orally rather than with pencil and paper or using a computer and then having to delete a whole bunch of their work. It helps them with their written output, as oral language is the first stage of learning to write. It helps our struggling writers share their ideas in a different way. It's excellent for their oral language development. It's an authentic way of including First Peoples cultures by using oral language to tell stories. It helps children learn to work cooperatively when they work on stories with a partner or small group. They must share ideas and materials while coming up with ideas together. They must take turns speaking. Story workshop is an amazing way to do hands-on learning. It is open-ended for all learners. You can differentiate your expectations for a variety of ability levels. You can use different amounts of material. You can have them work individually, in partners, in groups of 3 or 4 or 5, wherever you need to do to meet the needs of your students. It keeps the children engaged, and you'll see less off-task behavior. It's a great way to include STEM with language arts. It targets the core competencies of creative thinking, communication, and social responsibilities. The students can think about how they get ideas when they play and that their ideas are fun and make them happy. For communication, they can work with others to achieve a common goal and share. For social responsibility, they can take ownership of their goals, learning, and behavior. What materials can I use for a story workshop? The list is endless. You could have pages and pages of ideas, but pretty much whatever you have in your classroom, whatever you can find at the dollar store. You can ask for parents to donate things to the classroom as they are always cleaning out their homes and decluttering. So a simple newsletter home to your own families, or ask to have it in the school newsletter. Perhaps there's a local social media page that you could post on that you're looking for things for your classroom. So here's just the start of some ideas you might use. Kiva blocks, Lego characters, gems, construction paper, wooden blocks, fancy erasers, pipe cleaners, marbles, pattern blocks, puppets, magnetiles, yarn, foam blocks, buttons, fabric, feathers, felt pieces or shapes, stuffies, popsicle sticks, mini characters, plates, Q-tips, beads, clay, Lego, connects, cups, various tape, straws, Play-Doh, clay, toothpicks, things from nature, sticks, leaves, rocks, cut wood pieces, shells, anything you can think of, anything you can find and use. Your children will turn a simple thing into anything they want using their imagination. How can I store loose parts? This is perhaps the more challenging way to store loose parts. I've ended up with a much bigger collection than what you see in this photo here, but I have 2 shelves full of loose parts as well as what you see on these shelves here. I need to figure out a new storage system. I'd like to get some of those little rolling drawers and put some in there, and maybe just clean out some spaces where you have things that you no longer use. But little pencil cases are great places to store small loose parts, little baskets as you can see in the picture, bigger tubs for larger objects. And then just make sure that the kids only take a few things at a time, otherwise it creates a big cleanup mess. So you could put a few of these baskets on another table for them to choose from so that they're not choosing from the whole collection and creating a giant mess for you to clean up. Model, model, model. We always need to model for our students. So as we go through the story workshops, remember that anything you want your students to do, you need to show them first. So start by creating a story together to show them what to do. And then together you can write a list of steps with the students for what they need to do, or you can pre-write your steps, perhaps up on some chart paper that you can refer back to with them. Where do I start? So the first thing I would consider is creating an anchor chart for the elements of story. You can talk about their characters. As you get into older grades, create more features of these characters. For this setting, students create their own setting. If you tell them they can build with whatever they want, with as many pieces as you want, they will literally spend an entire day building their setting. So to get started, I would suggest just starting with 7 pieces for their setting. Tell them, for those who are really pushing you for a little bit more, say maybe 9, but it's really hard for them to start by controlling it with just 7. But they will get more into their stories versus getting on a tangent of building this elaborate setting. So for their first go, keep it small, keep it simple. And then what I usually do is, if we're going to extend the story over a few days or a week or so, put all their loose parts into a large Ziploc bag with their name on them so they can easily get them back out, quickly set them up, and then continue to work on their story. For the problem, you can make this simple for younger kids by brainstorming simple ideas, and then you can move into rising and falling action ideas for the older students. And then your solution, how does the story end? So hopefully before you get to this point, you've read other stories that other authors have written, and you've talked about these elements of the story so that they have a little bit of a background knowledge before you get started. Anchored charts can be purchased or created on chart paper. So you can see there's a poster that I used in my classroom as well. We created a list together in the class. So you can decide which way you would like to do it. Step 2, have your students choose loose parts to create their setting and characters. They can work with a partner so they have someone to share their ideas orally with. Depending on your class and grade level, you can move towards doing it by themselves. I have only used partners as that works better for younger students. And sometimes a group of 3, obviously, if you have an odd number of students. Children love to use loose parts to create their setting. So here's an example of what one of my Paris students did. You can see they have a very good time. You can also notice that we have been doing this for a while, so they were allowed to use way more pieces than when they first started. Here's another setup of loose parts. You can see we're just basically using materials from the dollar store, nice and simple. It doesn't matter if they want to cut things up. We use a lot of masking tape to put things together so that we can take them apart again to use for another time. Here's some examples from a grade 2 classroom. Character and setting pieces, so you can use your imagination. You don't even need to use 3-dimensional things. You can give them flat pictures of things to use as well, and they can be just as excited about that. I do recommend trying your best to use 3-dimensional pieces, but if you're just getting started and you don't have anything, then go ahead and start with 2-dimensional pieces. They can still manipulate those and move them about the way they would like them to. Some setups are way more detailed and recognizable than others. Here is a racetrack. As you can see, they have everything all set up, ready to go at that starting line. They even have a person getting ready to say, on your mark, get set, go. They really get into it. Step 3, use characters in the setting they have created to tell their story using the elements of story. You can adjust your expectations depending on your grade level, and also depending on the ability of your students, of course. You can adjust everything as needed. If you have some nonverbal students in your class, I would suggest putting them perhaps in a group of 3 so that they can just be the ones who move pieces around rather than having to have a speaking part. Or if you have a child who's super anxious and is just way too shy to speak, I've had some of those students, and it's fine. They can just move the pieces around. They can still create the setting. They can still be a big part of it. So just to adapt and adjust to what your students need. Students begin to play with their loose parts to create their story orally. So they have their little setup, they're all ready to go, and then they start to manipulate those pieces, and they will love it. Practice orally telling their story a few times for step 4. Then share their story orally with another group or the whole class, depending on how you would like to work it. Students can give their feedback to each other, such as using 3 stars and a wish system. So these are 3 things I really like about your share, and here's one wish I think that would help to make it better. So sometimes when they retell their stories over and over, they kind of change the story. So just model that on how that might look, what it might sound like, so that they know they're telling the same story and over and not creating a new story every time, because sometimes they can get a little sidetracked. And then these kids are sharing their story, practicing. They have a nice little setup. You can see it's a group of 3. It worked really well.
I am Mr. Lucky Boy. I am Mr.
For step 5, you can choose how to write their stories. For younger grades, they can write their stories on chart paper. If working in partners, they can take turns writing sentences. I find this really helped them figure out where sentences start and end, so they use capitals and periods more often in the appropriate spots. Partners is also helpful when students can't remember what they wrote when they can't read their own writing. So I really love to have them use different color markers for each sentence, and they just absolutely love it. Give them a marker and they are happy. As you can see, here's a little setup. They're using their markers. They've got their big chart paper. We spread out on the floor all around the classroom. You can see in this example here, each sentence is written in a different color. And so that really helps see where those sentences start and end. A great way to work on your punctuation. Here's one group's version of Chicken Little. So you can give them a classic story to write their own version of. You can offer suggestions on how they might want to change what's happening in the action, or maybe change what's happening with what characters they're picking. So all different options like that. And then here's their completed story. Yes, they scratch things out because when they're writing in marker, they cannot erase. But that's okay. It's really good for those perfectionists who always want to erase everything. We all know those students, right? And so just let them go for it with the markers. It's okay if they have to scratch some things out. But look at the middle part there. Look at all those exclamation marks. So we have been talking about how to show voice in your writing. And so they did it in those sense. You can see some of them have bigger words. We worked on that for voice as well. So you can incorporate all kinds of styles of writing into this section of the story workshop as well. You could also choose to have them write their stories in a notebook. You can have the students write in their own notebooks, or you can have the students write together where they're still taking turns writing in just one student's notebook. And as you can see, they got us so excited they wrote upside down in their notebook, but that's okay. Look at all the amazing words they got down for their story. Here's another example of them writing together in their notebook. Another idea, you could take a picture of their setup and then you could glue it into their notebook and then have them write their story that way too, so that they have a solid image of their story. And for future times, if you want to send it home to the parents or whatever, they will be able to see what their story was all about. You could also have older students type their stories on a laptop. For younger grades, you can have them write their stories on chart paper or in a notebook, and then the teacher could type them out into a book format and then even bind them, as you can see in these books here. When you bind them, it's magical. I like to bind the books in front of the students, so I'll bring the binding machine to my classroom and have them watch their story turn into an actual book, and their eyes just light right up. You can also create story maps with Ozobots. So if you've ever used Ozobots, they're little computer things that follow along a track, and then they can stop, they can spin around, they can go left, they can go right, depending on the colors on the paper. So you could have them draw a little circuit, just like you see here, and then put their setting all around and then tell their story using the Ozobot. In order to do that, the first thing you need to do is use the code sheets and then have them practice first. Teach the students that the Autobots read the codes from left to right, so they need to make sure that they draw the codes in the proper sequence. Then they can draw a path for their Ozobot to follow as the students tell their story. Useful functions and fun include pause for 3 seconds, slow, turbo, spin, and snail dose. Big and little buddies can create stories together. Here they are sitting in a circle beside their buddy, telling the story to the rest of the 2 classes.
Once there was a guy going back from work, and he took the elevator.
Ozobots can be frustrating. Tips to success with Ozobot story maps. Calibrate the Ozobots before using them every time. Turn them on and place them on the black circle. Some Ozobots have a mind of their own and will just not cooperate. Try another one and if it's not reading the code. Draw everything in pencil first, including boxes for Ozobot codes. Use 11 by 17 paper, not smaller than that. Color pictures of their setting on the paper with pencil crayons and not too close to the path. Do not have anything around the Ozobot. Too much clutter around it will cause it not to read the codes. Do not draw paths too close to the edge of the paper. Do not draw path lines too close to the other path lines. Do not make the corners of the paths too sharp. Try to make the codes exactly the same as the coding sheet. Do not put codes too close to other codes. So hopefully those little tips will help you be successful if you do want to try Ozobots. Coding debriefing is an important part of the learning process. So if the student's coding is not working, bring the class together at the end of the lesson. Ask them what they learned about coding. Ask them what they could try doing instead next time. Use it as a learning time, not a frustration time. So we can extend the use of story workshop with a couple of examples that I'll share with you here. You can use loose parts for descriptive writing. So they can build something super amazing using loose parts and then write a descriptive paragraph about it, or write one sentence about it, or draw a picture about it, or write an essay about it, depending on the level of your students. You could also use Story Workshop to retell a story you have read in class. Retelling is an important part of literacy, and it's also a challenging part for many students. So using loose parts just adds a little bit more excitement for them, and then they don't always have to retell a story just by rewriting or by using pictures and cutting them out, things like that. So very hands-on way of retelling a story. You can read different versions of classic stories, and then you can have students retell it in their own way. You can give them a specific element to change, such as characters or the solution. So read different versions of regular stories like Three Little Pigs, Gingerbread Man, and Mary Had a Little Lamb. So these are some little knockoffs from there that you might want to use with your students. Have students make their own wordless picture books after acting it out with loose parts. So this book, Hug by Jez Alborough, is a great example of a wordless picture book. The only word in the whole book is hug. Students could create their own mindfulness stories, such as this one, Peaceful Piggy Meditation. You could use Story Workshop to teach writing traits, such as voice, by first reading stories that are good examples of using voice in writing. Like, you're finally here, and we don't eat our classmates. Story Workshop can happen anywhere. Here's an example of Story Workshop at a forest. Look at how engaged the students are. This first group found a slug and used it as a character in their story. From little creations to big ones. So some of them went really big with their sticks and made gigantic settings in the forest. They had so much fun. Intermediate teachers. A lot of intermediate teachers will shy away from using Story Workshop in their classroom as they feel it's a primary thing. In fact, there are intermediate teachers all over the country who are successfully using Story Workshop in their classrooms. Uses for intermediate teachers: create settings to help inspire students to write stories. Use as a starting point for descriptive writing. Build detailed scenes to help students elaborate on their ideas. Use to show what they have learned in areas such as science, health, and career education. Make their own characters. Develop personalities for them to use in story writing, or create themselves to use for personal writing. How can I implement Story Workshop if I don't have any loose parts in my classroom? Borrow from other classrooms. Visit the dollar store. Ask students to bring things from home. Create a story in the forest. Write the story when you get back to school. Look at creating a loose parts mobile cart for your school, or keep them in one room that we can all borrow from. Okay, I've given you a lot of information today, so here's a simple breakdown of how you could get started in your classroom. First of all, characters and setting. Choose which materials, you could say this to your students, choose which materials your group would like to use for their story. Name your characters and decide what their personalities will be like. Build your setting. Develop your story. Come up with a problem and solution for your story. Have your characters act out your story in their setting. Write your story. On the chart paper, write out your story, taking turns to write each sentence using different colors. Share your story. Allow students a lot of opportunity to share their stories out loud, either with other groups or with the whole class. If you're going to do Ozobots, practice on the practice mats first. If you've never used them, create a story map for your story. Try it out with the Ozobots and share with one other group. Success! Thanks for participating in this story workshop session. I hope you have a lot of information now and have some great ideas on how to get started with story workshop. Don't forget to like and subscribe my channel for more videos in the near future. You will get those notifications. Have an amazing day.